See, those the temples which have been destroyed, no invader has come from outside. They were the Muslim kings. Once they came to power, they started destroying within their, you can say, kingdom. So they are not invaders like Somnath were destroyed by someone who came from Ghazni and destroyed, went back, or Mathura temples, or those. Here it was the local king only. Once they came to power, they started destroying systematically all these temples. They are all uh, run by the security forces. The temples would not survive even today if the security forces did not have a permanent presence within the temple complex in each temple. So that is our state of our temples in Kashmir even today. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to firstly thank Sangam Talks for inviting me for this talk on their platform. As you are aware, Kashmir always invokes a lot of emotions to all Indians for various reasons since ancient times. And in my talk today, I will talk about the historical and civilizational importance which Kashmir had, as well as also take you through the beautiful locales which are there, and most of us may have been there, but still, it's always wonderful to see how beautiful the valley is. So, as we are all aware, Kashmir is also known as Switzerland of India, and it's known for its beauty and the salubrious climate, being a tourist paradise with its breathtaking and magical locales. Nature has actually been very generous in Kashmir, and it has endowed the region with numerous mountains, forests, lakes, streams, and rivers. And this beauty has been enhanced with beautifully manicured gardens, which are located all across the region. However, in the recent past, due to terrorist activity, the tourism was restricted in the region. However, since 2019, the situation has improved, and the year 2022 saw a record influx of about 1.88 crores, that is nearly 19 million tourists flooding Kashmir and actually swamping the facilities, because only no one has seen this much outsiders coming into the valley. Now, what is the importance of Kashmir? Firstly, we should understand Kashmir has always been sort of in the crosshairs of terrorism and invasions, because all the invasion routes generally have come, of course, to south, from south of Kashmir, but it's always been there in the middle of the crosshairs of all nations since ancient times. And for that reason, it's always been called the jewel in the crown of India. And its strategic importance on account of its location at the crossroads of trade routes from Central Asia, China, India, Persia, and Tibet have made it an attractive prize for competing nations since long. And this has spawned the great game between the British and the Russians during the colonial era. And thereafter, through partition, the British ensured that the status of Kashmir continued to remain ambiguous after they left, because they all understood that whoever has control of Kashmir controls the complete Central Asian region. And this game continues now even after the British have left, only now that the participants have changed. And we should also remember always that Kashmir occupies a central place in India's civilizational history, about which not much is generally talked about and known. Now, if you see, most of you may have been there, but still, this is one of the spectacular views of Pir Panjal Mountains on the way to a place known as Sinthan Top, which is southeast of Kashmir Valley. Now, Kashmir actually derives its name from Kashyap Rishi, one of the Sapt Rishis, who is the Prajapati or the progenitor of mankind. Now, Sapt Rishis are the patriarchs of Vedic religion, the seven ancient sages of the Rig Veda. And these meditative surroundings have given rise to a multitude of sages and rishis in the region like Bharat Muni, Utpal Deva, Panini, making Kashmir a veritable storehouse of ancient Vedic knowledge and a center of learning. And Kashmir has also been the seat of Kashmir Saivism and Shakti worship from the Vedic times. Construction of beautiful temples dedicated to various deities continued during the reign of Hindu kings until the 13th century CE, since prehistoric times. And of course, most of them are now in ruins, but they are spread across the whole valley. And details of this, the Raj Tarangani, the Megan opus of history of Kashmir, it is actually a unique document which has a chronicled history from Mahabharat era up till the 12th century CE. And let me tell you that Kashmir is the only region in the country which has this sort of written history available. Now, this is another ancient temple, Mamaleshwara at Pahalgam, though most tourists visit Pahalgam, but I don't know how many have visited this temple. It dates to about 400 CE. Now, Kashmir has always played an important role in Sanatan Dharma and in the history of Bharat. Burazom is one of the oldest sites of the Neolithic and Megalithic periods, dating from roughly 3000 to 1000 BCE. And Kashmir was a part of a number of dynasties which have ruled over it over times, which include the Mauryan, Kushana, Hans, Karakota, Utpala, and Lohara dynasties. The Lohara dynasty was the last Hindu dynasty before the Muslims took over Kashmir. And then this continued till the time the Dogra kings came at a much later stage. Under the Kushana rule, Kanishka organized the fourth Buddhist council at Kundalwan near Harwan, which is near present-day Srinagar, in 72 CE, where renowned Buddhist scholars such as Ashwagosha, Nagarjuna, and Vasumitra were present. So it has always been a major center for such religious gatherings. And Buddhist scholar Kumar Jiva actually traveled to China during Emperor Yao Xing's reign and spread the influence of Sanskrit there in 401 CE. He was the first Buddhist monk to travel to China, and the Buddhism started in China thereafter. Now, Kashmir has produced many scholars, as I mentioned earlier, who have written very magnificent texts and scriptures, such as Vasugupta, who wrote the Shiva Sutras, Abhinav Gupta, who's a very famous person who wrote the Tantraloka, Tantrasara, devotional hymns, and his most important philosophical work is the Abhinav Bharati. Sharda Peeth is the most ancient temple of Kashmir. Of course, now it is in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. And though the temple origins date back to Vedic and prehistoric times, but the physical structure was built first by Emperor Ashoka in 237 BC and was the most important center of learning in ancient Kashmir. So it was not only a temple, but also a learning center. And in Shankara Dig Vijaya, which Adi Shankaracharya has written, this Sharda Peeth is described as, in Bharat, Kashmir is the most famous place. For there, it is said, Mother Sharda is present. In that region, there is a temple with 4 gates dedicated to Sharda. Within is the throne of omniscience. Uh, Lalitaditya is the most celebrated king of the Karakota Naga dynasty, and his campaigns, military campaigns, which were against the Turks, the Arabs, the Tibetans, in mid 5th century CE, are are actually one of the largest empires he created through this. But unfortunately, not much is known in the Indian historical context about him. He also built the Martin Sun Temple, which is one of the largest temple complexes of the Indian subcontinent. I'll touch a bit on the Itihas of Kashmir. Before I proceed further, a little bit about the term Itihas and why one doesn't use history while referring to our epics. You see, many Sanskrit words are non translatable into English. The philosophy and concepts of Sanatan Dharma alien to Abrahamic religions, and thus many Sanskrit terms do not have any equivalence in English. A common example is the use of word caste, which all of us use in our daily lives, which actually is of Portuguese origin and is taken to imply the ancient system of Varna, but it is totally incorrect because both actually signify totally different meanings. And similarly, Itihas and Puranas, which we mention, are not actually history or myth. And similarly, Atma is not, can't be given the meaning of soul. Maya does not mean illusion, nor Prakriti mean nature. So one has to understand clearly that so many Sanskrit words actually have no equivalent in English. And by trying to give them English names, we are actually distorting what they really mean. The word itihas etymologically actually means so it has been. So, itihas means the expansion or elaboration of an incident which happened in the past. History is a chronological account of facts, whereas itihas is a multi-layered tradition and is not merely history, and the narrative may not be linear in time. So, itihas is are based on facts, but it may be not in the typical Western concept of history. And the Indian concept of Puranas and Itihas can be regarded as an interpretative account of past events in a cultural or spiritual context. They are definitely not myths. So this, all of us should be quite clear whenever we are reading or referring to our epics. Now, Sharda Peeth, I'll just talk a bit about Sharda Peeth because it is one of the major centers in of Kashmir. Now, it is the abode of Devi Saraswati and one of the 18 Mahashakti Peeths. Sharda was so important in ancient times that they had their own script, which developed around 3rd century. Of course, it was based from the Brahmi script, which existed earlier. By the 8th century, it attracted devotees from as far as present-day Bengal. In L. Buruni's Chronicle of India, by the 11th century, it was listed alongside Somnath and the Sun Temple at Multan as a revered place of worship. Sun Temple at Multan is different from the Sun Temple at Martan. Multan again is in Pakistan presently. Between the 6th and 12th century CE, it was among the prominent temple universities in the Indian subcontinent, at par with Nalanda and Takshila. However, it's generally never mentioned with these two universities, but it was as important as them. The interior of the temple is actually a plain square with a large stone slab, and this covers the holy spring where Devi Sharda is believed to have appeared to Rishi Shandilya in the Vedic period. Now, Sharda, one should remember, became the spiritual mother of all Bharatiya Sampradayas. In other words, Sharda Peeth is not sectarian, but was the universal embodiment of all Bharatiya darshanas. Sampradayas, as you know, are the different sects, like we have Vaishnavites, we have Shakti worshippers. So this was actually encompassing all of them. This is a beautiful temple. All those who have been to Gulmarg would have seen it. Gulmarg, actually, the original name in Sanskrit was Gauri Marg, which has been twisted to Gulmarg. And this shrine was the royal deity of the Dogra kings. Now, there are actually two major scriptures, texts based on which the whole history and of Kashmir is generally derived from. The first is the Nilmad Puran. Now, Nilmad Puran is an ancient treatise on the geography, culture, and history of Kashmir. It begins with a dialogue between Rishi Veshpanni and King Janmejaya, who inquires about the absence of Kashmir kings in the Mahabharat war. So actually, it is of that vintage. It is indispensable for references to Kashmir, its war etiquette, surprising phenomena like the crowning of a pregnant queen, the geographical details, and Kashmir's natural beauty. All this is described in this Puran in detail. Now, the Nilmad Puran also narrates the story of the evolution of Kashmir. We are all basically aware that Kashmir at one point of time was a lake which drained out and the land came out. Now, this actually one has to go into our ancient time system to know how this evolution has occurred. Now, for 6 Manavataras, since the beginning of the Kalpa, Kashmir was a lake. Now, a bit about this Manavataras. Manavataras, to give you an idea, is about 307 million years. One Manavatara is 307 million years. And Kalpa is 1 day of Brahma's 1 day. Now, one Kalpa is equal to about 4.32 billion years. And in one Kalpa, there are 14 Manavataras. So, this is how our basic time, how time was divided in our ancient times. And presently, we are in the 7th Manavatara. So there are total 14 Manavataras in this Kalpa, out of which we are in 7th. So roughly midway, you can say. And between each Manavatara is a Sandhya occurs. Before a Manavatara and after a Manavatara. So for 14 Manavataras, there will be 15 Sandhyas, and each Sandhya is about 1.7 million years. And it is during this period that Bhulok, that is Earth, submerges, goes underwater, and then it comes out again, and the whole cycle is repeated. So, as you are aware, we have a cyclic time scale when we talk about Earth and its past. So, till this, for 6 Manavataras, Kashmir remained a lake. In the 7th Manavatara, which is the present one, the lake which was called Kashmira, it came out of the lake was drained out and land came out, and it got populated by Rishi Kashyap, who was the first person to on the land, and he married the 13 daughters of sage Daksha and populated this place. So this is just a bit of basic about how the evolution of Kashmir took place. And there's King Durlabh Vardhan in early 3rd century CE, the founder of the Karakota Naga dynasty, who actually commissioned the writing of the Nilmad Puran. So it is of that vintage. Now, this is a photograph of Nil Kund spring at Verinag. Verinag is in the southernmost tip of Kashmir Valley, and it is the source of the Vitista River, which actually was original name of what we call Jhelum nowadays. And the source of the river is there's this underground spring in the center of this pond, and that's from where the river starts. Now, the second document which chronicles the history of Kashmir is the Raj Tarangani. It is a very important document. a historical chronicle written in English verse by a Kashmiri Brahmin by name of Kalhana in 1148 CE and comprises of 8 volumes. It is justifiably considered to be the best and most authentic work of its kind, covering the entire span of the history of Kashmir region from 3450 BC to the date of its composition. It gives a lucid account of events, which includes the list of kings, queens, ministers, and their military expeditions. So it gives in great detail about actually what all happened during this whole period. Rajtarangini actually means river of kings, and it is a continuous narrative of dynasties that ruled Kashmir, beginning with well-known ones from our Itihas and morphing into the later chronological narrative. So in the later dates, as 19th, 20th centuries came about, it has morphed into the Western chronological narrative in terms of dates. It isn't focused on any particular dynasty or king, and it wasn't financed by a court, which actually makes it free of biases and one of the reasons of its credibility remaining intact. And it is accepted even by early Western scholars as one of the most important documents through which we can trace history of Kashmir. Now, another photograph of the famous Martin Sun Temple built by Emperor Lalitaditya Muktapida. It was actually built, there was a small temple existing there dating to 3007 BC. This temple was actually built over that temple, and the original temple is also still visible on one of the sides of the main temple. This temple was totally destroyed by Muslim invaders, and this is the ruins as of today, what we see on the ground. A bit about Emperor Lalitaditya Muktapida. As I said, he was one of the mightiest emperors of Bharat, about whom not much is known. He was the fifth of the Karakota Naga dynasty, founded by Durlabhvardhan in early 3rd century CE. Lalitaditya ruled for 36 years in mid 5th century, which is considered the golden age of Kashmir, when art, architecture, and learning flourished alongside his military achievements, which are also considerable. He consolidated his empire in India by subjugating the Pushyabhutis, Kanya Kubja, that is what we now call Kannauj in UP, Rashtrakuts in the Vindhyas, Kalinga in Orissa, Goda in Bengal, Konkan, Dwarka, Avanti, Punjab, and Afghanistan. So you can see the expanse of his empire, which existed within India. And externally, his empire extended from Kashmir to Central Asia and Aranyaka, which is Persia, and from Uzbekistan to the Sundarbans. So his actually empire is one of the biggest empires of any king of India in the past. And one of his main achievements was he turned the Chinese into his ally in fighting against the Arab invaders and the aggressive Tibetans, which one is generally doesn't hear about, but the Tibetans were a major force in those times. Lalitaditya's conquests have been chronicled in renowned historian R.C. Mujumdar's Ancient India, by Al-Biruni, the Persian scholar, in his Tariq-e-Hind, and in Xing Tangshu, which is the new history of the Tang dynasty. He thus not only drove the Arab invaders away, but prevented the then powerful Tibet from extending its influence in India, which was an outstanding achievement. Lalitaditya was also a great creator and built many temples, stupas, and cities. The Martin Sun Temple at Mutton, a magnificent capital at Parihaspur, though both are in ruins today, stand testimony to his creations. Surprisingly, this part of our history has never been researched in its entirety, bearing mentions in Rajtarangini and a few texts mentioned above. Information about Lalitaditya is sketchy and scattered, and his achievements largely forgotten. This is a photograph of artist's conception of Lalita Aditya Muktapida, taken from Wikipedia. There are no photographs or paintings as such available. This is just the artist's conception. Now, I'll touch upon how Muslim rule came about in Kashmir. Now, the first Muslim attacks, started in 8th century CE, and under the leadership of Muhammad bin Qasim. But these attempts failed. And after that, it took 6 centuries after Kashmir finally had its first Muslim ruler. So for 6 centuries, the Muslims tried to invade Kashmir, but they were kept at bay. After the Arabs, the Ghaznavids attacked Kashmir. Muhammad of Ghazni defeated Raja Jaipal in 1002 CE, who was the ruler of Hind near present-day Peshawar, but was unsuccessful in conquering Kashmir. And after that, about 300 years of relative peace followed. In 1320, actually, Zulju, a Mongol chieftain, invaded Kashmir, and the king at that time, Suhadeva, in 14th century, early 14th century, he was the last of the Lohara dynasty kings, a poor ruler who couldn't actually rule his kingdom, and accordingly, when the attack took place, he fled. And there was a Ladakhi employee of his prime minister, Rinchana, who, seeing the opportunity, murdered the prime minister and grabbed the throne. This Rinchana then converted to Islam and became Sultan Sarauddin Shah in 1320 CE, who was the first Muslim ruler of Kashmir. So if you see, from the first king of Kashmir in 3450 BC, 136 Hindu Buddhist kings have ruled for about 4,770 years. They ruled over Kashmir before it got its first Muslim ruler. So nowadays, the narrative that Kashmir is a Muslim country and always has been is actually needs to be seen in this is, as I mentioned, there are a lot of beautiful gardens in Kashmir. This is the Nishad Bagh in Srinagar, built in 1633 during the Mughal period. When we talk about any of our ancient history, I like to mention about the historicity of events, because you'll always see in different texts and different books, the dating of various events changes. People quote different dates for a particular event in different places. So a bit about the background to this. Now, it is said that ancient Indians had no sense of history and chronology. This is the general perception. And Al-Biruni was the first to remark that the Hindus do not pay much attention to the historical order of things. In his work Tarikh-e-Hind in 1030 CE. What is surprising is that when he wrote his book, he sourced his genealogies of the kings from Puranic records. And after using these and mentioning them as historical facts, he disputed the same source as being unhistorical. So that is how the hypocrisy started from that time. Now, a European scholar, James Todd, has pointed out, actually, which I'll quote, those who accept from a people like the Hindus a species of composition of precisely the same character as the historical works of Greece and Rome commit the very egregious error of overlooking the peculiarity of which distinguish the native of India from all other races, and their intellectual productions of every kind. Their history, like their philosophy, their poetry, and their architecture, are marked with traits of originality. And even Herodotus, who is known as the father of Western history, has been described as a great artist and storyteller. So, old historians, ancient historians in any part of the world have always mixed history with myths and legends. And it was important that how the artistic presentation of the truth was done than being more accurate about the scientific history of a period. So this was a common phenomena across all ancient histories from all parts of the world. Now, if you see the Indian Indologists in the recent times have now started pushing back against distortions of Indian history. And the so-called Indologists with Christian beliefs during the colonial era were reluctant to acknowledge that Indian chronology is much more ancient than the religious holy revelations. And they adjusted the Bharatiya chronology to their preset timelines rather than accepting evident facts. So this is one of the major reasons why all our dates have been falsified in trying to fit in within the Western Christian teachings. And whatever they couldn't fit in within their time frame, they just declared these texts were myths and did not simply exist. So that is their how they distorted the whole Indian ancient historical dates. Now, an example which I'll mention is the birth of Adi Shankaracharya. Western scholars have dated his birth to 788 CE, but actually it is 509 BCE, an error of about 1300 years. Now, I have dealt with this as a separate chapter in my book, but you can see how this error has occurred, and basically it was to sort of date him after Christ, so that a lot of his teachings could be sort of mentioned as having been taken from the Christian theology. Now, Pandit Kota Venkatachalam was a great Sanskrit scholar and published the original evidence-based research work, Ancient History and Chronology of Bharat. His efforts were truly Herculean, and his scholarly dominance changed the course of understanding of ancient Indian history. And now his chronology I have used in my book, and which is available in the index. But again, despite his great scholarly works, he still remains one of the most underrated scholars, and hardly one hears about him. One hears about many other scholars who are trying to contest our dating of our past, but he is supposed to be one of the most detailed works in which he has actually challenged each and every Western scholars where they have distorted the facts. Now, this is the cover of the book. Just to give you an idea, this photo on the cover page, it's actually a Shivlinga belonging to the prehistoric shrine of Adi Varaha at Baramulla, which is now known as Baramulla, and the shrine is still available. It is there, but hardly visited nowadays. And on the rear page, you can see again the sacred Nilkund string, the source of the Vatista River. Now, a little bit on the book, what has been written as a few comments, just to give an idea of what the book covers. General V.K. Singh has written that historians have been unable to connect the past with the present effectively, which has resulted in ambiguities and misconceptions about Kashmir's history and the central role it has played in Bharat's emergence as a civilization. The book provides an insight into this missing link, which is easily comprehensible even to the lay reader. And in the preface, Dr. Mitra, being a psychologist, he has given a very poignant preface. I'll quote a sentence. The pictures in the book are subtle, have a depth, and taken by a photographer having a deep compassion to preserve the legacy of these temples for future generations. He wanted to capture not just the broken walls, boundaries, and inner architecture, but the melancholic, haunting message they carry and the history. one of the highlights of the book is actually the names of all rulers of Kashmir from 3450 up to our independence in 1947 have been listed in the book as part of the appendix, which I mentioned, and they provide a fascinating insight into the history of the region. The book also described numerous ancient sites, knowledge about which has been lost over time. This is another photograph of one of the major shrines in Kashmir, Mata Kheer Bhavani in Tulmul. Anyone who's been to Kashmir would have definitely visited here. And the highlight of this shrine is that the spring water which comes out, it changes color, predicting what is going to happen, whether some good news or bad news. So, and it is historically been proved to be generally correct. And this has one of the biggest gatherings annually of Kashmiri Pandits in Srinagar at one place, even today. The book I have actually divided into two parts. The first basically is the Itihas of Kashmir, I have already mentioned. And the part two is the places, shrines, more of a travelogue for a person who wants to visit Kashmir. You can see this is the Kashmir Valley, which has a range of mountains running on the east and the west. And Srinagar is roughly in the center of this valley. So on the north, you have, say, Bhadrakali temple. So this is Bhadrakali temple starting from there. These places all badly terrorist affected. Even today, it's difficult for a normal person to make it to these places. Baramulla, which we mentioned, Manasbal Lake. This is the Kheer Bhavani temple, Naranag, Kangan temple complex, another big temple complex right up in the mountains made by Lalitaditya Muktapida. And then you have Srinagar and down to very ancient shrines of Kapal Mochan in Shopian, the Herbal Waterfall, another tourist destination. Then we come to Verinag Spring, the source of Jhelum here. Sinthan Top, a few views I showed. Martin Sun Temple is at this place. Achabal, those gardens which I showed are here. Pahalgam, Chandanwadi, which is the start point for the trek to Amarnath Cave. From here, you go to Amarnath Cave, and the second route from Baltal, which you come down a shorter route, is Baltal is somewhere here. So people also come from here. And Aru Valley, which is a beautiful destination, or any tourist will definitely have visited, gone to this place. So I have divided these destinations into, these are the tourist places I have mentioned, covered in the book: Srinagar, Gulmarg, Pahalgam, Chandanwadi, Betab Valley, all these places, Achabal, Mughal Gardens, Kazi Gund Tunnel, which is the new tunnel recently inaugurated a few years back. This is one of the views on the drive to Pahalgam, beautiful locales you can see all along the way. And these are the shrines which I have covered in the book, the ancient temples which are there, starting from the Shankaracharya temple in Srinagar, Kheer Bhavani temple, Mata Bhadrakali temple in Handwara, which I mentioned, remote areas. Baramulla has got a number of shrines. It is one of the holiest places of Baramulla in the ancient times. Of course, now hardly any Hindus even exist there. It's also got a famous Gurdwara there. And then the Nararang temple complex, Kapal Mochan and Shopian. They all have a history, and the history of all these shrines, why they are famous, is all covered in the book in reasonable detail. And then you have the Holy Springs, Mamaleshwar temple, Martin Sun temple, and there's an ancient temple in Manasbal. So that basically brings us to the end of the lecture. This is that Naranag temple complex I mentioned, halfway up the mountains, built by Emperor Lalitaditya. It's at an altitude of over 2,000 meters, and there are no road connectivity. And this complex extends over an area, over a distance of more than 200 meters in the mountains. There are large number of now ruins available. So it was a magnificent site in the ancient times, and I wonder how it could have been built in such a remote place in those days. And that brings me to the end of my talk.
Good evening. Namaste, Brigadier Singh ji. What a wonderful, wonderful talk. We got so much information, really. It was, I think many of us know a few things here and there, but you really, gave it a very, very comprehensive picture. I'm really looking forward to reading this book. I'm definitely
Thank
going
you.
to buy
Thank
your
you.
book. I actually have a specific question on which I had done a certain amount of research, but I was not able to find out much. One is, when we speak about Kashmiri Hindus, we're always talking about Kashmiri Pandits. Right? Now, all the kings that have been mentioned, including Lalitaditya, is there a history of Kshatriyas? Have you found out any information about Kshatriyas? And if so, what happened to the Kshatriyas? Were they killed? Did they move out? That's my
I'll
question.
just try to give you a brief reply, because this question also struck me many times. When I was earlier used to read, you hear only Kashmiri Pandits. The genocide which happened in 1900, 1993, only one hears that. Now, actually, what has happened when I have gone through all my research, whatever little bit I have done, the earlier kings, naturally, they were Kshatriyas only, those 136 kings which ruled uh, for nearly 5,000 years, they were Kshatriyas. But once the Muslims came, yeah, it is quite surprising. Not, I won't say surprising, but it was quite a disaster that within the first 60 to 70 years of the first Muslim king taking over Kashmir, nearly the whole civilizational structure which was present had been devastated. Just 5,000 years worth of work which was done within 60 to 70 years, you can say 80% was finished. They had broken nearly every place. They had converted large numbers, or either, forcibly or otherwise. So, what happened actually by the end, the only people who resisted conversion were the Kashmiri Pandits, they were the Brahmins. Rest everyone either converted or ran away. So, ultimately, who is left in Kashmir are only the Pandits who are Hindus. So, because the rest either converted or ran away. So, I think that is my reading of the research, why we call them all Kashmiri Pandits.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, thank you so much for this very, very interesting talk. What I want to ask is now, there is so much of renovation going on of these ancient monuments, especially in Delhi. I don't know where you're from, but like there's one monument near Nizamuddin, which is called some subs, where they used to store the food grains, which has taken I don't know how many years, but they have renovated at whatever cost. Now we know all these temples have been there in Kashmir. Why can't they be renovated?
No, that's actually the sad part. If you saw the few photographs I had posted of, say, Martin Sun Temple, which is supposed to be the most, you can say, visible place of Kashmir in terms of its ancient history. Anyone who talks of Kashmir will know about Martin Sun Temple. The temple, you go, it's very well maintained lawns and greens, but the architecture, the building as such are in total ruins. You still find pieces of uh, sculptures, gods and goddesses lying all over the place. And if you are walking around, you will be stepping on a few of them, even today. So, for some reason, I don't know, the ASI has, I think, failed miserably in renovating or trying to bring those ancient monuments back to life. Few they have done, but most of them remain in bad shape. The other thing I'll also just mention, like that ancient shrine of Mamaleshwar in Pahalgam. Now it is a living shrine. There's a Shivling puja. People go for puja, and you can offer whatever you want to offer. The best part is it is under ASI. The person who is there, who accepts your thing, is a local Muslim. So, I mean, that is the state of affairs. So, as I said, I mean, the ASI has got a lot of work to do if they want to bring up these shrines. That Narana temple complex, it's a huge temple complex. There must have been how many number of shrines there? They are all in, some have been, I mean, they have tried to do some work, created a boundary wall around them, but otherwise they are in shambles even today.
So I'll just ask my question. Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful and insightful session. I recall you had sent something about, I think in Martan temple, there was an older part of the temple that you can see, I think like 3rd century BC. So if you can elaborate on that, like, is it, is the present day temple built around it, or, and anything that you can say about the older or the original temple?
No, not 3rd century, 30th century. It was 3007 BC. That's what
Okay.
that's what is said. No, it's see, unless I think some excavations or something are done, you'll actually not find any details. There are signs of an old temple in the existing complex, next adjacent to which the new buildings have come up. So nothing much is known of that place. Of course, if you go through my appendix, which I have attached in the book, I think I have mentioned the name of the king during whose reign that initial temple was built. But otherwise, not much details are available because no work, no excavation, nothing much has been done in these places.
Yeah, so very nice presentation, Brigadier Sir. It was like really, this is very a lot of new information came through. So and yeah, just and I wanted to know that all these all temples and all which you showed, right? So like, do we have information on these, like who destroyed these? Because I know some whatever these Mughal raiders came, right? So they used to write their own biography, something like that. With some Sufi saints with them, they will write that they did that because of showing their power or something. So we have information on this, like you mentioned about Pandit Kota Venkatachalam, right? So he has his work is in the early 20th century, right? So has he mentioned these things in details? If this is in scope of your session.
No, Pandit Kota Venkatachalam has not done this aspect. He is tried to correct the chronology of various dynasties. And just for information, he's done this not only for Kashmir, but for most parts of India. So you'll find the various dynasties ruling in north, south, east, west of India, other parts, Orissa, UP, Andhra. He's corrected the chronology of most of the major dynasties in India. That is first part. About these, who has destroyed all the major temples like Martan Sen Temple, this and that is all known. See, the temples which have been destroyed, no invader has come from outside. They were the Muslim kings. Once they came to power, they started destroying within their, you can say, kingdom. So they are not invaders like Somnath were destroyed by someone who came from Ghazni and destroyed, went back, or Mathura temples, or those. Here it was the local king only. Once they came to power, they started destroying systematically all these temples.
Yeah, sir, I wanted to know, you said that about ASI not taking care of this Martan temple. So as per you, what would you suggest or, recommend that should be done so that the past glory, or at least, the history of the place and artifacts are, if not restored, at least protected?
No, I mean, they are just required to do what they should be doing, and that is not only maintaining the lawns and the grass around the temples, but also trying to restore the broken parts of the temple to whatever extent they can to the original shape. And I mean, I think that's what they are supposed to do, and they have to just do what they are supposed to do. As I said, you see the pieces of the things still lying all over the compound in that, because Martin Sun Temple, there is just one example. There are many more such examples. And the other thing, let me also tell you that, I mean, not directly related to this question, but otherwise that most of the temples actually which were alive till say 1991, 92, when the exodus of the Pandits took place. After that, for some years, most of these temples, there was nothing happening because of the terrorist threat. And slowly, the army, which is deployed all over the valley, they started sort of restoring and opening up the temples. So a large number of temples, like say in Baramulla, or that Mata Bhadrakali temple in Handwara, that in the northwest you saw in the corner. So they are all run by the security forces. The temple would not survive even today if the security forces did not have a permanent presence within the temple complex in each temple. So that is our state of our temples in Kashmir even today. The security forces are permanently encamped inside every temple. And in many of these temples, the pujari function, there's no Kashmiri Pandit available anywhere nearby. So the security forces provide a chap who does the puja and the other rituals which are supposed to be done. Or if a devotee goes, like if we go, he'll be there to do the job of a pujari. So the live temples which are functioning in most of these remote areas are due to the courtesy of the security forces presence and their active function in running of that place. And it's not only that, most of the temples are heavily guarded and fenced off. If I've got many photos in my book which are there, if one sees, you'll see how heavily fenced it looks, like a prison compound from outside, the way they are protected from, even with the security forces within the complex, the boundaries and everything is heavily fenced off with 5 meter, 20 feet, 15 feet fencing. So that is the state.
Hello, sir. Good evening, sir. I have already got your book and I've started reading it. It's a smooth read and a well-researched book, I would say. So the only query I had, that if somebody else wants to explore these temples, what would be a good approach? Do we need any internal connections with the authorities there, or do we need how do we go about if we want to just, follow the same trail or something like that?
No, you don't need permission as such, but you will have to find firstly, you will have to find a local tour operator who can take you. Like the remote temples which we went, a normal tour operator will not take you there for two simple reasons. One, either it is actually very remote, and for that reason. The other is few places are still under terrorist sort of threat. So I was lucky that, of course, I had gone as part of a normal group. I had not gone as from the army side or using their resources. I went as a common group. So we did find a local Kashmiri Pandit who also conducts these tours, and he took us to these places. So we are lucky that way to have visited these remote sites as a civilian group. So one has to just find someone to take you there.
Thank you.
Of course, depending on the current situation, you may, like you all may have been reading just a week to 10 days back, there was that big terrorist event in Kokarnag near Anantnag. I think it lasted nearly a week, just last week. So that is the area on the way to Sinton Top and Achbal and that area. So it's a matter of, I'll say, chance. When a strike occurs, you can't predict in advance. And I'll also, just to tell you that during one of our trips also, we were on the main road and suddenly there was a big queue on the road. The traffic had stopped for a few miles behind on the way to Pahalgam. So when we asked, they said there's a army operation going on in the nearby jungle. They have blocked off the road. We waited for 2 hours. That operation got finished and they opened the traffic. So I think this is part of how it this is a normal sort of scenario in Kashmir. But luckily, I don't think the terrorists target tourists because that's where the income comes from. So tourists generally, you will never hear a tourist being targeted by any of these terrorists because they know where their money comes in.